The world is very ancient, and human origins are mysterious and obscure. We try to decipher our past based upon the multiple layers of civilizations whose ruins lay strewn across the planet like pieces of an archaic jigsaw puzzle. Some of these old civilizations are still buried beneath the deserts, mountains, and oceans, awaiting a time when they will yield their secrets through human discovery or natural cataclysms that will strip away and reveal their hidden locations. In the unique perspective on history that will be explored in this series, the case for a vaster chronological perspective of history will be investigated, based upon ancient sources hitherto unrecognized by the majority. With limited tools at the disposal of modern sciences, history has been abbreviated into a narrow band that does not sufficiently explain the vast time periods needed to evolve the human form and human consciousness. Deep in our racial memory or collective consciousness lurks the legends and myths of lands and continents that once existed, such as Lemuria and Atlantis. Fabulous stories abound of advanced cultures with their arts and technologies that have risen to great heights and then fallen back into the dust of history once again. Understanding these rhythms and cycles of time help us to understand that our modern civilizations are not the first to have emerged, nor are they necessarily more advanced than previous ones that have come and gone. This new approach to history challenges the way we think about the past based upon our cultural, religious, and educational conditioning. These structures have helped humanity thus far understand the world, but which in today's rapid acceleration of planetary consciousness are very limited and starting to break down. They are overdue for transformation into a broader, more inclusive vision. The possibility of discovering and understanding the origin of the human soul and its divine pedigree is imminent in our time. We stand before a doorway leading to planetary illumination upon the greatest mysteries of life, the hidden history of humanity.
The intention of the Hidden History of Humanity project is to re-establish the correct chronology and timelines for human history. That's part of it. The other part of it is that humanity is disempowered in not knowing its true origins or indeed the chronology. So to establish the correct chronology and the understanding of the root races, how humanity came into being, and how the evolution of consciousness proceeded from there, is going to empower humanity with knowing the truth. Humanity is having the truth hidden from it at this point in time, but it is actually emerging. We have light emerging, we have truth emerging, and this is happening exoterically in parallel with this esoteric emergence of the ageless wisdom teachings.
Part of the intention of the Hidden History of Humanity series is to present a chronological sequence of history that demonstrates the evolution of consciousness by humanity, the mystery of when the human soul came into existence and its purpose. This first series will establish a broad structure of understanding for the future series that will elaborate further. Evolution will be traced from before the human race appeared through the stages of the Lemurian, Atlantean, and current root races. It will finish with contemporary humanity that is now transitioning into the sixth root race. It will discuss the evolution that will unfold in the future, always in the context of what has transpired. It has been said that unless we understand our history, then we are condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. On the scientific side, several key areas will be explored in this history of the root races, such as geology, geography, astronomy, archaeology, and anthropology. From the religious angle, some of the most ancient works will be referenced: the Hindu, Jewish, Persian, Islamic, Buddhist, Gnostic, Celtic, and Christian traditions. Investigating the hidden history of the world means that we must return to discover the birth of the solar system, of which our Earth is but one participant. Stupendous questions will be explored as to how this solar system came into existence, with its subsequent planetary schemes, chains, rounds, and globes.
Modern science insists upon the doctrine of evolution. So does human reason and the secret doctrine. The idea is corroborated in ancient legends and myths, and even by the Bible when it is interpreted esoterically. We see a bud slowly developing from a seed and a flower from the bud. But what of the seed with its predetermined program of physical transformation? What about the invisible, therefore spiritual forces which gradually develop its form, color, and perfume? The word evolution speaks for itself. The origin of the present human race pre-existed in its parent race as a seed, in which lies hidden the flower of the next race. The ancestors of the present elephant and lizard may have been the mammoth and the plesiosaurus. Why should not the originators of our human race have been the giants described in the ancient Hindu Vedas or the book of Genesis? There are several keys to the mysteries, past, present, and future, of the 7 great root races and the 7 great cycles. Every symbol and allegory is said to have 7 keys, the 7 keys to the entrance of the door of the mysteries, and that each key must be turned 7 times.
Well, the ageless wisdom has been called the perennial philosophy as well. It's ageless because it's timeless. It's the same verities and truths that exist throughout all time. And the ageless wisdom teachings come through to us in many forms, through mythology, through various amanuenses who have been transmitters of the teachings from the hierarchy of the masters of wisdom, through the ancient Vedas, of course, through the spiritual traditions that exist universally. These various frequencies of the ageless wisdom teachings are available for people to plug into at whatever level of understanding that they have reached thus far in their soul evolution.
There are several other keys to this study that include psychology, physiology, metaphysics, astrology, and sacred geometry. The synthesis of even a few of these keys will shed light upon the evolution of consciousness in the human kingdom, the purpose of the human soul, and its existence. For many, to be told that the age of thinking humanity is around 18.6 million years may invite some disbelief or even derision and ridicule. Such is the state of Maya, or illusion, in which we all live, conditioned by thousands of years of wrong thinking, religious propaganda, ignorance, and lack of spiritual education. The somewhat overdeveloped concrete mind of humanity in this fifth root race is a particular liability, in that it does not recognize the subtle so easily, only that which is tangible. History, with its many evidences of past civilizations, is in a tangled and confused state. Humanity's approach to our past has imposed upon itself the limitations of dogmatic science and theology, ignoring the ancient traditions that hold the keys to many of these riddles. We live in a time of the approaching astronomical cycle of Aquarius, where the ancient mysteries will be reinstated after thousands of years of being hidden from the eyes and ears of the profane. Humanity stands at the doorway of initiation into the mysteries of history and higher consciousness. There are many isolated strands in history that can be drawn together. There are many facts that can be collated, especially those corroborated by direct as well as inferential evidence found in ancient literature and history. This is one of the fundamental purposes of the Hidden History of Humanity Project's books and video series. Much of this ancient literature is contained within the Hindu Puranas, the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. This is logical, for the Hindu tradition is the oldest of our current races. In the Puranas, the meaning and chronological order is very clear. We can count generations of the Manus and their series of incarnations as heroes in the old stories. The Manu sets the tone and type of any given race in terms of its evolutionary goal. The ancient book of Manu gives a complete narrative of creation with a chronology of the divine ages of the heroes through to the appearance of man on earth. Likewise, in the Egyptian tradition, all the lists of past kings were recorded carefully, documenting races and sub-races reaching right back into ancient Atlantean and Lemurian history. The most recent references to our current fifth root race also come to us from the Old Testament, where the history of all the human races is contained in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Much of this will also be explored in this series. Genesis, from chapter 4, verse 16, through to the end of the 5th chapter, gives purely historical facts taken word for word from the secret book of Numbers in the great Oriental Kabbalah. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, and Seth, are the same as the Hindu Manus who set the tone, impulse, and purpose for each evolution in the root races, sub-races, and branch races.
The Book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 10, has preserved a tradition that speaks of the 7 races, where there are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come.
This passage refers to the 5 root races that have elapsed, including our 5th root race that is almost finished. That which is not yet come refers to the coming 6th and 7th root races. Interpretation of the Bible, both in the New and Old Testaments and based upon the secret sciences, has yet to be fully exposed with its many allusions to the septenary constitution of earth and man, to the 7 major cycles or rounds and the 7 root races. The ancient Greek tradition was also a repository of the ageless wisdom, encoded throughout its wonderful and deeply evocative mythology. The Greek allegories give to Atlas 7 daughters, representing the 7 subraces of Atlantis. These daughters are the mothers of famous heroes, the founders of many nations and cities. Astronomically, Atlas's daughters are the 7 Pleiades. The 2 are connected with nations whose destinies are shaped by the past events of their early lives,
especially
according to universal karmic
of my reconciliation. 200,000 dollars or euros
are divided
on
into
the
the golden,
New York
silver,
International
bronze,
Market.
and iron ages.
In further,
and have an identical
I would like to tell you
correspondence to the
it is a
individual
picture.
cycles,
I
such
can
as the
explain
Kali
because of
and
this.
Satya Yugas.
And furthermore, notwithstanding this, I would basically like
The 3
to
one-eyed giants of Greek mythology are a reference to the last subraces of the Lemurian root race.
show you something.
Hence, we can see the sources of the ageless wisdom or perennial philosophy that lay hid in universal mythology and religion. The same or similar stories are told in all cultures, indicating the consistency and veracity of these ancient stories within the collective consciousness of humanity.
Mythology is one of the great keys to studying the mysteries, because the mysteries are encoded in mythology, in Greek mythology, in Scandinavian mythology, in mythology of all traditions. Like music, mythology is one of the great universal languages that we can understand and which anyone can tap into quite easily for understanding the archetypes of the gods that are described in the various stories. In mythology, we have the stories of all the planets and their relationship to one another, personified by the planetary gods. We have Zeus, Jupiter, and Mars, and Venus, and Mercury. They all have these various stories which describe their interrelationship with one another. The ancient wisdom teachings are encoded in all mythologies, East and West.
The secret history of the world is revealed in many traditions, the duration of which far surpasses the minuscule figures used in modern times. In the denial or ignorance of its true origins lies the source of disempowerment for humanity, in not knowing its divine source, the nature of the human soul, and the very lengthy evolution of human consciousness. Who today really reflects about our true history and ancient past, preoccupied as we are in a busy world trying to survive? Most people accept the culturally conditioned views of the Western Bible and or modern science, both of which do not, on the average, offer more than 5 to 10,000 years for the origin of human civilization. However, this is changing in some fields of science, going back into hundreds of thousands or millions of years in some cases. root race, resonant with 5, the number of 5, that has been achieved of perfection, refinement, and quintessential expression of the concrete mind. Although this has brought many benefits in science and technology, its shadow expression via the critical mind tends to be separative at the expense of the love principle. The lower mind only functions through the 5 tangible senses. In the coming Aquarian cycle, the secret sciences will blend more fully with mainstream science. The 6th sense, or intuition, is in its early stage of development in this imminent 6th root race, hence perception of the more subtle aspects of human evolution, such as the aura, chakras, and the invisible forces behind nature, is still there, unrecognized and unrealized by the majority. With regard to our history, there are many crystallized belief systems that influence current world thinking. They are compounded by unquestioning and undiscriminating acceptance under the authority of modern science or religion. Likewise, history tends to stay in a straitjacket of conformist consensus thinking that excludes any other viewpoints. This is changing, however, almost imperceptibly, as inquirers from many disciplines are questioning existing viewpoints of the status quo. They are uncovering more and more evidence that will continually transform current thinking. This Hidden History of Humanity Project series is part of this incoming wave, expanding our worldview, pushing us ever forward in our evolution. Reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. It is beyond the range and reach of any human thought or expression. The manifested universe is contained within this absolute reality and is a conditioned symbol of it.
Because I am lecturing. In review, I want to introduce you to my eye, the extension I do is very nice news. Very special. $20,000 or euros on the international Europe market. In further, new secret union.
But veil after veil.
$25,000 or euros on the international Europe market. So we have this. That I have done. Did you ain't gonna see me in a hyperdome?
Speculation on the intelligences and hierarchical orders of worlds is evident in many traditions. One can only ponder on the rich diversity of life within this living cosmos. All of these factors inform us that we cannot possibly be the only form of creative intelligence in this vast panorama of worlds, and humanity is coming to this gradual realization and imminent revelation in fact.
This is Benjamin Owens with Ahsoka, and I will now tell you something about my business. Ahsoka, the Gallery Marvels. the power of economy. Nigerian cards for millions of dollars, deciphered. Did I publish books when I was 14 and bound them by myself is definite. Yet, I have Stephen Calvert in special letter editions for my next Nobel Prize is positive. Lectureships that I pay for every day.
Incarnates
It's
over a
special
vast
sense
cycle called rounds or
and
manvantara in Hindu
possibilities of
parlance.
special
These
small
cycles are
operating
important
practices in action model centered government
and
and
schemes
the
of
possibilities for
earth
application in very hard places. And my special postcards for investments into tobacco all over the world.
So around
Possibilities of numbers and different things to go all over the world and further to all the dead from anywhere in the world is my business for the revitalization of whole Europe and European Union by skyscrapers, Nigerian banks like Cuba, and different other things like the European and American society based in Europe.
these rounds are
Huge
broken up into
industry
two other
is
lesser
heavily
cycles
maintained
of
by
over 7
servant
million years each, and these are
infrastructure run prime, which has skeletons, hidden skeletons, and everybody accommodated with money generators in the street, and what else would this render? So this
A panel connected to
So
Replicator with a
these
3D
7
Studio
rounds
Max
are
interface and
opportunities
encompassing the whole
for
interior
the
of a replicator and healer.
incarnating monads
A cartridge
of
with
the
vitamins
planet
which bind themselves
to
on microwaves and
gain
bombard the lying
experience
body
by
within the
incarnating
tricoder
upon
machine.
these streams
These
of
binding
energy
molecules
which we
of
call
iron or
rounds.
steel also the possibilities
And-
to replicate
and
objects for the
subsequently
person within or
find their
food by binding
incarnation
basic molecules
into
of
the various
hydrogen,
root
starch,
races,
and
sub
fat.
races, and branch races.
The beginning attempts to create an organ by bombarding the middle of a replicator with the molecules
In this
of blood.
diagram of the Earth scheme are 7
People
large
can soon
circles
present
called
almost a pottery
chains.
kill, wheel.
Within each of
replicator
these large
organs and
circles
vitamin
are
healer,
7
and one is a
smaller
large
circles
hospital
called
equipment also for the
globes.
treatment of cancer,
The
immediate
planets
healing
are
of
called
severe injuries, and
schemes
basically
because
most of
behind
known
the
diseases
visible
by
outer
means of
planet
programming and
are a
channeling
series of
particles.
worlds in more subtle matter called globes and chains.
By means of allocating electricity power in a plant by means of a tempering
A planetary
wheel,
scheme
you should
holds
reach
within
tempered
it
electricity
the
with low
microcosm
voltage by
of the
means of burning
entire
a single
solar
plutonium or
system.
quartz rod for the whole world. The new appliances should thus
Our
be programmed
planetary
and work on
logos,
low-power
which is the
batteries or new
ensouling
digital
entity
appliances
of our
on a
physical
tempered
Earth,
electricity work
undergoes
by means of
many
white laser delivered on
incarnations,
billions
which
of
are
coordinates
called
per second
globe
without any danger
periods.
if they reflect metal.
There are 7 globes that are contained in a chain of globes. These 7 chains in a scheme make a total of 7 times 7 equal 49 globes. They represent past and future incarnations of the life we call a planetary logos, or God, upon our planet.
all my plans for the future.
Note that the
So
current
come to
incarnation
me
of the
next
Earth
time
is
you will
chain
see.
number 4, the central chain of the 7 chains.
Hello, this is Benjamin Arns,
It's
Mrs.
also called the
Harkin,
moon chain.
and I will not tell you my prognosis. So listen to the way outside on this eventful
A
evening
reminder.
that I will show you my lazy key
So
The
the rounds are
possibilities
globes
of
and
the
to greater picture of the
difference
So
between lazy
considering
key
the whole solar
and
system as an
better
incarnation of the
prognosis
great light
of
that
IRA my
so
gun.
then we can get into a little bit more detail within the solar system. Every planet in the solar
Possibilities
system is regarded as a
of
planet
different
scheme.
extrapolations on
In that
Bergamo
scheme,
and the
consists
prognosis
the
of
globes and
Italian
chains
life
of each
in about 10
individual
years
planet
ago.
scheme, which is a
Currently,
microcosm
the European
of the
market
entire
and the
solar system.
stagnation
So
of
various
the
globes and
prognosis
chains within the
for
Earth
future
scheme
investments
named the
of
Neptune
Calcutta
chain or the Venus
and
globe and so
Nigeria.
forth.
Nobody
And
is
of
really
course, all
certain
these
how this is
planetary
going to
schemes within
become,
the solar system are
but
connected
the
to one another.
investments are definitely on the high agenda.
In time and space today, our Earth scheme is currently in the 4th globe of the 4th chain. about halfway through its evolution. It is now in the 25th globe, or incarnation of a total of 49 globes in the Earth's image. A globe period lasts for 4.32 billion years.
The solar system as a whole is said to be at the middle point of its evolution, but on a much larger scale of some 155 trillion years. The Yuga cycles have been described as symbolic by many modern scholars, but they are also literal in terms of time measurement. These are stupendous time scales, yet if one seriously studies and reflects upon the ancient Yugas, it will be found that they have an innate beauty
When I was 12,
that
in our
transcends our
city,
modern measurements
the
of time.
international revenue from Europe and Africa, I was supposed to earn very big money,
is basically the solar
and
cycles.
the thing didn't find out
Typically, these
as I was
cycles
taught in the
periods
purpose,
of time,
and
they
incidentally,
repeat on different terms of
nothing
evolution.
happened for another 15
Cycles
years.
of rays.
And now when I made the whole overturn, the things changed fundamentally, because I earned a lot of money. When I was 12, I received the first checks in the 16, and I sent it to Canada. And from the checks, the Bank of America was created, because the ship's weird and different name, because the ship got to need. So do you want to tell me, or I want to tell you, that I created the Bank of America, and I am the sole proprietor of the whole business? That's what I think, because that's how it is. Further, we came from France as a sole remedy from the French bureaucracy as Schmidt, and our villa in Prague was destroyed in the first revenue, and we had to move into the present quarter. So I would like to tell you the whole problematic of furthermore the logic that I made the whole overturn now
Here is a
after the 15 years.
of the
And
proportion
I'm waiting for all of this to pan out around in the gap which contains polypheridone for heightening your plastic palpitation and investigate the psychiatric problems all over the world, along with psychiatric problematics in Germany like Schmidt. So you want to tell me that the psychiatrist logic is absolutely that we Germans and Russians in everybody instead of normative people visiting the place and enjoying all our Czech Republic GTS pass. So you want to tell me the psychiatry helps the world, which help them see what, help the injured, and help to recuperate. So psychiatry, like Brian, called an living hood, you tell me what about us? Furthermore, like so wrong in every kind, like a single thing things like wrong in California Institute in Berkeley, in Harvard. The brothers, the third school, which is also the same big substitute to Afghanistan, but also locally, which makes it relatively so that the person for interview communication, but not so much. So certainly, the international trade is going to become in class that we are going to earn a lot of money in how long? In 2 years. Oh now. The elephant weight is the wonderful to be able to have chance for the other forward and the international business is all over the planet. And we know that in justified nations, in prosperity, that we have been factories after Al-Sahel. There's so many things have been destroyed in the Czech Republic in the last 30 years that nobody recognizes this country anymore. Did it make today was really that sort of is not very good never anymore. Did I let you that the first moment people and they were here to research people and how they treat the others and that which would complement education all over the world, that we would normally understand, normally be in our posterity, that we would build everywhere sophisticated remedies for online shopping, manufacture, and online life. It's possible that we would theoretically think about normal managerial that we knowledge of different industries. I don't want to constantly tell that the civilization is sophisticated enough to be economically for these things that we don't read or things so registered. So, do you want to tell me why? So many people only desire to understand this in a livelihood. I basically don't understand anything. It is so rare for me that to know this in so much, and also for the that's me. So where everything.
Humanity is somewhat disempowered in not understanding its past, which is the origin and purpose of the human soul. Also, there has not been a fixed time from which to reckon, by which to measure history. And saddled with the shortened chronology that is supposed to explain the entire unfoldment of the human race, a distorted reality has been created. The spiritual path is one of forever peeling back layers of illusion. The mystery of human evolution is one of the greatest secrets yet to be fully revealed. Science and the secret science system roughly confer on some of the big cosmic scientists. It is ironic that in the time scales of the sciences, such as archaeology and anthropology, there is required a huge addition of time for the birth of civilization, from 3000 to 4000 BC, back to 18.5 million years. Equating the esoteric record of time with the current accepted geological record, there is a massive subtraction of time. From around 65 million years for the Jurassic Age, down to 28 to 20 million years for the esoteric doctrine. The big dinosaurs may well have existed 65 million years ago, yet the esoteric doctrine states that the reptile extinction was closer to 20 million years ago. Disparities and contradictions abound, yet they are not unresolvable or irreconcilable. Consider, 500 years ago, it was thought that the sun orbited the earth, and that the earth was flat. Now, that illusion has been stripped away and transcended thanks to the astronomer Copernicus. Yet despite all the amazing scientific advances since then, accompanied by expansions of human consciousness with regard to Earth's true history, in some ways we still live in relatively medieval times. Just as a human being has its allotted lifespan, so do all other lives, planets, solar systems, galaxies, races, civilizations, and nations. All entities, therefore, have a reasonable cycle in which to achieve certain goals in the evolutionary pattern. Esoteric cycles are based upon the astronomical precession of the Earth orbiting the Sun. It takes 2,160 years for the Sun to precess the equal sign of the zodiac. From here, all the greater cycles are measured.
In this simple table, the chronology of science is on the right-hand side, whilst the chronology of science is on the left. Figures are included in numbers. Even though there are large disparities between the figures, when more understanding of the process of dating occurs is acquired, these figures will be represented. In this table, you can see that the astronomical precession cycles of 2060 is the basis for all the greater cycles, of how 12 of these cycles relate to of 25,920 years, of how multiples of the 4,320 cycles create the figures of the Hindu Yuga.
I want to introduce you to my eye. The friendship that I do is very nice news. Very special. $20,000 or euros on the international New York market.
For an entire global
And further,
or one incarnation.
new cigarette union. $25,000 or euros on the international New York
Globe
market.
incarnation of Earth. There are
So we have
7 major
this.
cycles of
And
evolution,
that,
also called
that I have done.
rounds.
Did you
The
even
rounds are
see me
composed
in
of 2
Hebridean?
cycles each, called Manvantara, a total 14 in all. The rounds are cycles wherein the life wave of human spirits incarnate through a planetary system and changes and grows. This human life wave experiences life in all kingdoms, starting with the mineral, the vegetable, animal, human, and finally the kingdom of soul.
What is our purpose as spiritual monads to embark upon such a long journey through all the kingdoms? Part of the answer to this mystery is to evolve and grow, and to bring evolution upon Earth to perfection, eventually to the status of a so-called sacred planet. This has ramifications for the greater life of the solar
This is
system
Benjamin
and its
Mr.
evolution
Sokan,
as a whole.
and I will now tell you
We
something
can see,
about my
therefore,
business.
the inseparability of ourselves from the great Creator and
the
all
power
kingdoms in
of
nature,
belonging.
for they are all modes of expression of
Naturally,
this
it
great
carries
being
for
to
millions
be
of dollars.
purified
Deciphered.
and transformed into higher
Did I publish
consciousness,
books when I was
thereby
14?
eventually joining
And
a
found them by
evolution
myself is
with the other
definite.
planets in the solar system.
Yet, I have Stephen calibrated in special letter editions for my next Nobel Prize. It's positive. Lectureships that I pay for every day with special stamps and possibilities of special snowball programming practice and Archibald Stanford Code that the possibilities for vacation in very far places
Rounds are the
and
cycles
my
of
special
time
postcards for investments into tobacco all over the world.
the globe.
Possibilities of numbers and different things to go all over the world and further to all the dead from anywhere in the world is my business for the revitalization of whole Europe and the European Union by skyscrapers, Nigerian banks like Uber, and different other things like the European and American society based in Europe.
There are 7
Huge
root races.
industry is having
Combined with the
maintained
7
by
realms, this
CERN
makes a total of 7 times 7,
infrastructure
or
run
49
dry,
root races
which
in
has
the global period.
skeletons, even
As above,
skeletons,
so
and
below.
everybody accommodated with minor generators in the
Just as we
street,
explored the
and what
49
else would
globes
it
of the
render?
planetary scheme,
So this
Panel
this
connected to
evolution is
replicator with a
reflected
3D
in the
Studio
49
Max
root
interface
races
and
in just
encompassing
one
the whole
globe
interior
period.
of a replicator and healer.
These
A cartridge
rounds
with
and root
vitamins which bind
races
themselves on
provide the
microwaves
physical
and
body
bombard the
of
lying body within
incarnational
the trick odor
experience
machine.
for our Earth
These
logos.
E-binding molecules of
Human
iron or steel
souls
also
are
the
light
possibilities
cells
to
within this
replicate
greater
objects for
body
the
of
person
God.
within or food by binding basic molecules of hydrogen, starch, and fat.
Within
The
each
beginning
root
attempts
race
to create
are
an
7
organ by bombarding
subraces,
the middle of a
and within
replicator
each
with the
subrace
molecules of
are
blood.
7 branch races. 7
Twopeople
times
can
7
soon
times
present
7
almost of pottery
equals
pill,
343
wheel, replicator
races,
of organs and vitamin
all with
healer
their
in one is
allotted
a large
cycles,
hospital equipment
providing
also for the
a
treatment
highly
of cancer,
diversified human
immediate healing of
expression
severe injuries,
throughout
and
the
basically
ages.
most of known diseases
The
by
branch
means of
races, in
programming
their
and
turn,
channeling
give
particles.
birth to the nations.
By means of allocating
A root
electricity power
race
in a plant by means of a
is a
tempering wheel,
planned
you should reach tempered
unfoldment of
electricity with low
consciousness,
voltage by means of
where
burning a
a
single
certain
plutonium or
archetype
quartz rod for the whole
is
world.
created by
The
the
new
so-called
appliances
manu
should thus be
of the
programmed
races.
and work on low-power
And
batteries or new
various
digital appliances
civilizations
on a tempered
unfold within
electricity
that
work by
particular
means of
time
white
period
laser
of a
to
root
meter on
race,
billions of
which of
coordinates
course
per second without
encapsulates
any
7
danger as they
subraces
reflect metal.
and 7 branch races within each subrace, giving many, many different incarnations, possibilities of civilizations, and of course all the soul groupings, the 7 ray soul groupings, who incarnate through those particular branch races and subraces and root races to gain experience, and of course all aim towards enlightenment and liberation ultimately.
This is all my plans for the future, so count on me. Next time you will
Hence,
see.
the nations that come and go are the leaves upon this tree of life. They have their autumns and springs and constitute the shortest cycles of
This is Benjamin Lawrence, Mrs. Sarkar.
The smaller
And I
branches
tell
that
you
support
my
the leaves
prognosis.
are the
So
branch
listen to the way
races
outside
that
and listen
correspond to
eventfully
a
me.
26,000
That I will show you
cycle.
my
The larger
lazy
branches embody the much larger cycles of the subraces.
of
The trunk of the tree represents the largest cycle embodied by a root race.
and better prognosis. For I already my God.
All the races and subraces that evolve are seeds for the
Possibilities
next level of
of
evolution.
different extrapolations and then
All
come
races
and the
and
prognosis
subraces
of
have
Italian
evolved
life in
so
about 10
while
years
the
ago.
race is unfolding,
Currently,
it will give
European
birth to
market
another
in the
seed
stagnation of
that
a
will unfold on a
prognosis for
partially
future
parallel timeline.
investments of Calcutta.
Although this is a
Energetica.
two-dimensional diagram,
Nobody is
we
really
can think of
certain
time
how
and
this is going to
evolution
become,
as spiralic.
but the investments are definitely on the high agenda.
The root races started around 150 million years ago. During the latter part of that immense cycle we call the fourth round. The first 2.5 human races were in the subtle or etheric realm and gradually evolved into a physical form with skin and bones in the middle of the third root race of the myriad. Human bodies were enormous in those times, but through development of the mental principle became smaller and more refined.
Halfway through the third or Lemurian root race, in the precise evolutionary cycle, a magnificent preordained spiritual event occurred on Earth. It was the coming of the Lords of Flame, who imparted the spark of mind to humanity. This was a humanity who were hitherto only members of the animal kingdom, with animal instinctual awareness and in reality no mind. and it is where Earth's greatest mysteries lay hidden. The Lords of Flame are also known as Kumaras, and emanated from an evolution from within the Earth scheme, called the Venus chain. It was an evolution associated with Venus, but not from the planet Venus per se. Remember, each planet is a scheme of chains and cones, which are a microcosm of the great solar system. The planets sing together, creating the music of the spheres, a cosmic symphony. The presence of these 105 Kumaras created a great influx of force, so powerful that a mighty storm raged over the planet, destroying most of the animal kingdom, dinosaurs and humans alike.
The advent of the Lords of Flame, the electrical storm, which ushered in man, was distinguished by disaster, chaos, and the destruction of much of the animals. The spark of mind was the strength of its vibration, the effect of its presence, caused the death of the animal form, thus producing the immediate possibility of the decomposing soul bodies. Such purpose was that new physical bodies were taken from
This individualization period occurred in the third branch race of the third subrace of the third group race, Lemuria, expressed as 333. The number 3 relates to the universal mother who births all forms.
Why this is basically happening.
The individualization process started 21.6 million years ago. The chronology of the secret sciences that pinpoints the death of the dinosaurs. After a few million years, the individualization process for various groupings of humans culminated 18.6 million years ago, with the final registering of this spark of mind. Consciousness was not instantaneously received, like turning on a light switch. Groups of souls needed special attention by the guides of the race in this 3 million year period to fan their spark into a flame. During this period, another miraculous evolution occurred. The future humans were digital members of the animal with instinctual consciousness were hermaphrodite also. In other words, they reproduced themselves without the aid of any mate. Thus, hermaphrodite humanity gradually transformed into a two-sex species over this 3 million year period. By the time the process was completed, it corresponded to the completion of the individualization period 18.6 million years ago, in the subrace of the male and female then started to reproduce the way humans do today. Adam and Eve in the garden represented this separation of the sexes, whilst the eating of the apple was the gaining of consciousness. This biblical story will be covered in greater detail in this series.
As the serial codes do not work anymore. So
If we study the
individualization
individualization period, most of the mysteries of humanity,
it's what Pavil was trying to propound it around Prague you would build. Very
the period of individualization
circle
represented the awakening
for
of
the
the
Chinese ghettos or the
previously part
newcomers
of the animal
or the
kingdom,
newcomers.
unawakened humans of animal
The further infrastructure of Prague
occurred back in Lemurian times, halfway through the Lemurian Root
is
Race,
trying to side with
and
Slovakia.
it was kickstarted or triggered by
The
the
problematic
so-called
is
Lords
also
of Flame
similar,
who came
as
from
many
the
people
evolution
from
within
Ireland and possibly
scheme.
also from music
This evolution within the Earth scheme is associated with beings, but it was not Venus per se. The presence of these beings, these Kumaras or Lords of Flame, created an electrical field around the planet that
so now everything
ended up
changed
destroying most of the animal kingdom at that
and
time.
we saw that
This was probably the true period of the death of the dinosaurs.
So
It was the death of
we
the
want to
human
take the
forms at that
educated
time,
whole. Do they
were part of the
use
animal
passports?
kingdom,
why many people like Lucy, the evolutionary writer born in California, interpret all over the world and lives partly in
this occurred around about 21.5 million years ago, but it took about 3 million years to fan the spark of fire into
so why doesn't
greater flames.
he receive his passport?
Over this 3 million year period,
new newcomers that have been living here in Prague, like British, American, different people who have been living in Prague for the last years.
So Animal Man at the time
A panel
went from
connected.
instinctual consciousness to individual
Hello,
self-consciousness.
this is Benjamin Osmond.
The possibility to store uranium,
This particular
plutonium,
period
and toxic
is,
waste generally has been
delineated
found
in
it's
the-
possible
So
through
here,
pristine
first
granite.
I'd like to lay
Pristine
where
granite
Adam
layers
and
and
Eve
vast
about
stretches
the
of this
Jewish
unblemished rock.
beings was
Drilling
totally
deep holes for
different.
storing toxic
And
waste is,
more
according to me,
possible
logical,
understanding
because the ramifications
the
for nature might be significant.
prognosis and
The possibility to utilize
deeper
plutonium
insight
rods for
into
individual small
the
pristine granite beds in
understanding of
front
the
of unit
table
houses is,
shows
according
the
to me, a better
timeline that
idea.
corresponds to
European
these subrace
personhood.
events in
The
The
Lemuria.
problems of keeping
And
environment clean
definite
and the logical
agendas
anesthetizing for
can be
preserving
on the agenda
environment
for
for
the last,
future
let's say, 40
generations is
years.
important.
So you
The
want
possibility
Gradually,
to understand
all
that we
the
might soon
lords of
start
flame,
building modern
their work
technology machines
completed,
and propelling
returned to the
devices that will
Venusian
help us
evolution
understand new
within
methods
the
of
Earth's
travel and
scheme.
space travel.
Yet 7 of these Kumaras stayed, the chief of whom is called Sanat Kumara, or Melchizedek,
who shot several
also
films
known as the Watcher,
for
or the
children.
Ancient of Days.
So we in Europe have
He
such
presides over
insight into
humanity
the situation.
until the last weary pilgrim
that,
struggles home.
What's
In
the
other
problem
words,
with the films
until the
when they
last
were so
of humanity
educational?
achieves
The next
liberation.
should win. Most
The
people
This
people.
was
my age
also
were
the time of the
Interesting aspects of
establishment of the
barbarians.
planetary center
And their
called
possibility to
Shambhala,
see.
over which Sanat
Significant
Kumara
puffing up of any
presides.
listener.
One of the first
Is according
films
to
for
current
which we
science
went
possible.
to cinema when we were about 6 or 8, were exactly such films right from
The possibility
Following
of
the
panic
table
there
shows that
To have
Shambhala's
enriched into a
establishment
large-scale object
coincided with human
has been proved by several sources.
we were educated in
The
this
idea
way.
of a new
By
phone keeping
California.
health norms is an incredible
He
one,
realizes the human
but making
race's
prize a real
origin.
difficulty. In
There
analyzing
again,
the particles which
we
help
are
to puff up a hammock
inseparability
bear in
from
water.
deity. And that
Smaller
our
gelatin
evolution
bears might have
contributes
developed
to
into
the
large
greater
ones in
evolution,
seconds or minutes.
and vice
Where
versa.
the films
In
showing
the
Milliseconds.
tables, we can
intercourse,
see these
but proves
chronological
knowledge has been found.
correspondences with
Educational
subraces
about the boy
and root races.
who was saved by him as the main role of the film was a detective, and he
The humanity
took
of that ancient time
very deep
was enormous
respect
in
by
stature,
the pedagogists.
though evolution
like the
has been
films.
refining and
So we would
decreasing
think
in size
he could actually
up to our
receive
present day.
a prize of peace, Nobel Prize.
Even over
for
4 million
all
years
suffering.
ago, when the final
Because
destruction
in
of
logical
Lemuria
understanding of the
occurred,
possibility,
just before the first
we won't tell
Atlantean
me
destruction,
exactly
there were still
what
very large
about
giants.
the governor,
Indeed,
former governor
the
of
statues
California.
of Easter Island that are
So
about
you
30
cannot tell
feet
me
or 10
that
meters
he's
high
such a good
are
person that he
representative
educates
of
whole
the
Europe
height
and
of the
America
giants of
how
that
to
time.
take care after himself, enjoy hygiene, and
Of all
show
the mammalians,
millions of
man
women
is the
how
only
to
one
exercise every
whom
day.
science does not
Exactly, that's
allow
what I
to have
think.
dwarfed down
So
like
we might
all
have come to
other
the
animal
conclusion
frames.
that I can tell you
A decrease in size
people
is allowed
might
from the
show
dinosaurs
different
to the
type of
present-day
respect
reptiles,
how to
but not
lead
for man.
warfare with a snowy logic like in the
This is
Great Empire
partly
in the
due to
16th
the
century.
so-called lack of evidence
If we
of
see-
physical skeletons, because of
Do you
factors such
understand
as the
basically
action of
how the
sand
soul
on
is
the ocean floor
understanding
upon bones,
only,
or that cremation
Ghana,
was universal up to
but
100,000
also
years ago.
problems
This will also be
of the
explored in
lunatic
depth
asylums
later
all
in
over
this
Europe,
series.
which I traveled around, and I can tell you that
Because
the
such a small time period of 6 to 10,000 years for human
one-third
development has been
the
assigned
whole
by
space in
contemporary
Ireland
science.
can be just
It does not allow
lunatic
sufficient
asylums.
time to
You won't
entertain the
tell me
idea
that this
that
is-
giant
this
humans
is what-
gradually decreased
that from
in
the
size over a
things that I
period of
mentioned
millions
in
of
our
years
Institute of
in
Charles
parallel
University.
with the reptile kingdom.
Most people who went
In other words,
in the
in Lemurian
90s for the
times,
psychology and
humans were
psychiatry
about
at
the
Charles
height of
University.
dinosaurs.
And also me, which was partly educated
Over the
as
past
pedagogist,
20 million
can
years,
tell you that
reptiles
it's very
and humans
problematic
have decreased
who,
to the
after
size
all,
they are
received
today.
the doctorships and the prognosis for being capable to stay in the job as psychologist and psychiatrist, like Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Peshko, Cherna, Shasta, or Mrs. Schneider, further Dr. Crowley and Carrie O'Neill, has Arabian origin.
So the hidden history of humanity
Want to tell you
project
exactly what
seeks
about
to
the process,
document
how you
and
are
visit many sites
psychiatrically
around the
treated
world where
psychologically
these
incidents in
relics and
your
artifacts
childhood,
remain
that you had
of
all A's
ancient
in your
civilizations
school
such as
and you were the best student
South America, Cusco,
in
Peru,
high school.
Easter Island,
The
the
problems
ancient ruins of Greece and many ruins around the
of these
Mediterranean,
things
their extent across
should
the
be
whole
logically
planet.
understood into some
In fact, this
possibly working
architecture is
unit.
called cyclopean
So
pentagonal
the problems
architecture,
what I've seen
which
in
are
the past,
odd-sized
how
blocks,
you
but quite often with
treat
five
and
sides,
misbehave
perfectly
these young people.
and
Not
creating
to say into
earthquake
surgeons, but I can tell
walls
you
and
those
buildings.
are the
And so we have many
so young,
instances of ruins stretched around the world
I
that
can
have this
prescribe
kind of
you in
architecture.
Vega, I can prescribe you
For instance, in Mycenae in Greece,
also,
we have
or dozens of
these
other
marvelous
pills
ruins that
currently on the market
look like they've
to
been
treat
built
your
by giants. And in
psychiatric and
fact,
psychology breakdowns every day
part of the hidden
as
history of
police come
humanity
for
project
you and they are
looks
trying
at
to
the
brought you
evolution
enormous
of
sense.
human
So if you want to
form
tell
from
me that
giants
this is
down to the size
psychology
that we
what
are
you
today.
studied in the
In
90s
fact,
at Charles University and all
these
over the
giants
world.
built.
Did I ever tell you
In
about
fact, we
seeing
were
what
talking about
psychology
cyclopean
what
architecture. We're
psychology for
talking
the
about
young,
the
for the
legendary giants
psychiatry
with
is help
the
to
one
disable,
eye.
to
And
injure
these giants did
people
exist
who
back
have
in Lemurian
small
times.
problems with psychiatric
And
helps out.
these
It's a
almost
good
lost
when a person, a youngster, gets injured and he cannot recuperate from the injury. So he goes to a psychologist and show off if you are feeling better. And once you are feeling better, then you have money, family,
The
and you
Titans
also
of
have
old
sex.
and the Cyclops,
You have more money,
legendary three-eyed
more money,
mortals,
more
belong
market,
to the fourth
more
Atlantean
minerals,
root race.
or if you are a spiritual person,
All their subsequent
then you
legends and
swear
allegories are found in the Hindu Puranas, the Greek myths,
yourself
and
a
Homer,
spiritual order.
based upon
And
hazy
bring
reminiscences
justice
of
and
real
understanding of
Titans,
nations.
men of superhuman,
So you tell me what
tremendous
psychiatry
physical power,
currently in
which
Europe
enabled them to
can
defend
solve the
themselves
world.
and hold at bay
Against
gigantic
certain and
monsters of the
humankind in
geological
general,
Mesozoic
they beat
and early
fought, and they
Cenozoic
injure and
times.
threaten people, and they cause them up into
In the
incapable
mythology of
conditions
the ancient
under
Cyclops,
following.
the
And the
three
problem
giants
generally
with one eye
is
are said to
very big,
represent the
as
last
nobody
three
really
subraces
understands how
of
this
that
is going to
newly
lead.
conscious
So you wanna
Lemurian
tell me
race.
also
At the peak of
that
physical
there was a
development in
third war,
Atlantis,
or what
they
is
have been
basically
described
the
as
war
towering
sometimes.
giants, beauty and the
War, or
depositaries
terrible
of
war.
all the mysteries of heaven and
I
earth.
can receive the price of honor for what?
The giants of both
Pogrom and
Lemuria
sex
and
in Germany
Atlantis were able to
such
build large
terrible
structures
ignominy
and lift
takes place in
enormously
Germany
heavy
in the last
slabs
30
of
years.
stone, but
What is
also
basically,
had at their
you can tell me,
disposal
is,
technologies that allowed stone
You think I smell that boil?
effortlessly.
It's disgusting.
I really need someone to
An
make my
imperishable
meal.
record
Taste
about the
and
gradual
every
evolution of the
nuance
race
is art.
has been left for us in the
Your
Banian statues of
by
Afghanistan.
doctors. Then do you think that this is
They were
logical?
created during
That
the
according
Atlantean
to the
flood
old
kneel,
when
legends of
initiate
the body,
adepts of Atlantis
country of
were
Wilhelm
taking
will be
refuge
back.
in the Central
The problem
Asian
was
mountains.
that these operations
The
were
five
also
different
current in
sizes
the
of these
past.
statues are said to
In the
represent the
pre-past,
height of the
let's
five
say,
root races
1,000
in their
years
enormous
ago,
early
when such
etheric
operations
stages
were really
and in
possible
their
as we
later
have
still gigantic
identified
and then
books
smaller physical
which are
development.
normally readable all over Europe about this content, and doctors also read them. So you want to tell me
Civilizations
basically
in
that in the
Lemuria and
1990 you
also
decided
had
to
access to
recuperate archaeology
technologies based upon sound
into the
that was
vision
able to
hood of
create a
Dr.
vacuum
Hood,
and lift
that you want to
these
tell me
blocks
that this is logical,
effortlessly.
that in the
Many
90s
blocks
during
of many
Havel
tons
more or less lived
transport them
according
from
to
many miles
normal
away
prevalence
to
and
their particular
circumstances
sites, such as
understanding of normal
Stonehenge is a
people
good example of
and the
this.
humankind.
And
So
in many of
why
the
did
mythological
this all
stories in
abrupt
South America,
this
in the
600
Celtic countries of Europe, we find very similar stories
you
of
want
the
that
addition
we would blame you, we would basically
transport of these stones
cut
from many
ourselves
miles
to
away
pieces like
effortlessly
stick flesh,
through the air.
and that we would go for some crazy ride,
Transport of these stones
that
may
we
seem
would end
like a
up in
magical process
Nabucodonosor
to us,
with
but
even more British
to
euro
those who
than
had
is
the
this
knowledge,
what
it was simply about
the Queen
rendering
of
the
Britain
atoms
wanted.
within these stones
That we
weightless.
would go into
This is the
Nabucodonosor
science of
and
magic.
see what hides in the east, like a vivid eye. It's possible that you want this,
It's
and it's
important
possible
for
that we can do
humanity
this.
to understand
But
the
nobody
cure.
basically talks about in
We
generalities.
don't
We would
know.
understand
Most people
how we want to further
they have
work
a vague sort of
on
idea
infrastructure
that we came from somewhere,
possibilities.
came
We
from
would
apes. Usually,
understand
this is what
what
is taught
everybody
in
is aiming
in
towards.
high school. And we
Because
evolved
basically
from
in Europe,
apes somehow
you might also
to
revert
human
into
beings.
80s or,
Well, the
or
secret doctrine
70s
states the
and
opposite.
reprint
That in fact apes
old
were a
banknotes that
byproduct
we
of
would
human
understand
evolution that
possibly
went wrong at one
put
stage back in the
into
Mongolian time. It was
caskets
not part of
and
the plan
caves.
of the
But do you think that the
planned
paper is
evolution.
valuable? That
These beings,
basically
the so-called narrow
most of the gold that we
bred with animals,
received from the
that
previous
wasn't
wars, all of Europe and America, was melted for checks
gold.
on electric guitars
Apes of today
and amplifiers.
descendants from
So for me, tell me that it would rare to prove what substantial substitutes do you take now gems and all the treasures that do you want to tell me that there are still treasures in the East? Most people think that there are none anymore. So you wanna talk about what prognosis of living hold and how do you want to further structure
According
the
to
world
occult
without
doctrine,
paper address and paper
humans bred
generators.
with animals in
Basically,
Lemuria,
are we really
creating an
entering a time
unnatural and
where we are going
unplanned
to make you
linking.
think
The
artificially
hybrid monsters
and beginning
created
to think
were the ancestors
about
of our modern
sophisticated
apes. At individualization,
means of transport
certain groups
and
of
sophisticated
souls
means of
refused to
payments.
incarnate because
That
they
every
regarded the
castle in
bodies at their
France and Europe is
disposal
going to
as
have
too
its
coarse.
own paper ledger,
They were
like a
ultimately
digital pamphlet
responsible
on the
for the
wall.
groups of
It's
humans
possible.
that caused this evolutionary anomaly, the so-called
constant
sin of
progress
the mindless.
technology, Amazon, which might later
The
on
modern-day
receive also a
orangutan
Nobel Prize
is a
for the
peculiar
incredible
human reminder of that
millions of
ancient
books
transgression.
printed
And today, these
through
apes
Amazon
are
and
getting
also
much publicity
Lulu.com.
because their
That
habitats are being
some
destroyed in Indonesia through
notions
rainforest
persist
logging.
that still we understand. That,
When
for
the
example,
unplanned
this
interbreeding occurred with animals, the celestial guides
for the world
immediately
as
struck
they
some
contain
groups with
almost
sterility
the largest
in order to
heritage
halt that which was
we
not
printed
in the
in the last 30
program of the
years.
divine
But
plan.
notwithstanding this, how do you want to carry on in European Union with so much states and
Can we
problems?
imagine if this one
Really
fact of the
going
secret
for
sciences
psychiatry
was considered?
when she has two
That
children, and why
apes
do you
were created by
do
humans
it?
breeding with
For
animals?
what reason do you blemish people
What a dramatic
when trying to
revolution in
normally raise
consciousness
families?
would take place in how humanity
How do you
views
basically
itself.
still understand psychology and psychiatry
Currently, in
on the
educational
market?
institutions, a
How do you want to
5,000
tell
to
me
10,000
that you
year history
don't
of the
visit
human
a
race is
psychologist
taught,
or a psychiatrist?
and that it evolved from
He
apes.
says, well, I get
Humanity,
it.
however, has a much more divine
And
and
if you would
ancient
like, you
pedigree.
can simply use it and come whenever you desire, as this is
Madagascar was once
any
part of the
necessity
Lemurian
for
continent
you to come here.
and boasts
You see,
dozens of
this was
species
the
of
opinion of
lemur
a doctor
monkeys.
in the 70s. Currently, you are
Lemuria
abided
was
to go to
originally part
psychiatry
of a
every
long
month from your
prolongation of
childhood.
land.
And if you have
The
wrinkles,
main
you have a serious
continent
problem how
extended
big
from
you are,
Madagascar
as you
in
might
the
be
west,
thwarted by justice.
encompassing India,
The problem
Australia, and Indonesia, right
Millions of
across
kids
the
all over the
Pacific
world
Ocean,
who went
taking
for
in
psychiatry
Easter
in the
Island,
70s and 80s
Hawaii,
have
and parts
very
of
big
the
problems to
Americas.
assessing their families if they survive
Australia
in the
is the
21st
largest
century.
surviving remnant of this once vast
The problem of
supercontinent.
Satoshi in Japan, who created a website for generating Bitcoin,
The
was
fledgling
executed
humanity
in
during
Japan
early Lemuria
for that
was
purpose.
under the guidance of
And why?
divine beings
When
said
such,
to emanate from celestial
websites are
spheres
about 124
far higher than our own,
and,
giving instruction in
available all
building,
over the world.
agriculture,
For no
fishing,
reason.
and
The
language.
market was almost thwarted in Europe, in Japan, and all over the
These
rest of
divine
the Eastern
beings are the source of
plateau
our
and the
speculations that
Eastern
Earth
world.
has had many visits from ancient
What
aliens.
it's for, these women
These
who
same
travel to
speculations
Asia
tend to
to show you
attribute
films
everything to
with so
them,
many
which is not
disregard, disrespect, and killings. These breakdowns,
However, the mighty
murders, and
ones performed
atrocities on
their
TV.
great works and
You
left
wouldn't
behind
tell me
them
to go
everlasting
to work.
monuments
You
to
want to tell me that
commemorate
this
their
is of
visits.
interest
Within our
international market.
They appeared at the
and
beginning
see
of every
people are
great
starting
year,
going to start work.
or precession
The
cycle
European
of
Parliament
26,000 years.
It's basically like a conglomerate of nonsense and constant strife and havoc that nobody
In
understands
ancient
that you are
Chaldea,
another person.
these beings were
and
called
your
the
daughter should
Kabiri,
have a very
or
good car
Kabarim,
and family.
meaning the
That are you
measure
going
of
to
the
talk into her
heavens.
things and go
In
drive her
order
to
to
psychiatry
prepare
for what
suitable
reason? When
candidates for
psychiatry
initiation,
is
it was
supposed to help
decided
you
about
with your
17 million
problems.
years
Did
ago
you should
to
marry?
build an
Did you have children?
organization
Did you have food?
and a
Did you have sex
headquarters
in
for
your
the
life?
mysteries.
Did you have a good car? I do not remember in the last 30 years that any psychologist would recommend me to buy a good car. Do you know why? Because then I would say, then I don't have even any money to buy the car.
Today
and that's the problem.
determines the
because
astronomical
European Union doesn't have
conclusion
almost any
of
money.
one precession
I
cycle
understand that you
and the
can't see
beginning
it,
of
but I
another.
can tell you that it's true.
Can we again
European
soon
Union
expect visits
doesn't have
from the
almost
mighty
any money.
ones?
Any money
Or are they
whatsoever.
already here?
That Ireland lives from the British subsidies for the last 30 or 40 years
The many
and doesn't
daily
have even
occurrences
their
of
own
UFO
food.
sightings may well
Yet,
indicate them
ghettos in
making
France
observations
are a
of
sign
how
of sheer
humanity
terror
is responding
and
to its
poverty,
opportunities.
just like in Ireland and Britain. That every medical substitute that is sent to European Union from Great Britain
There is
is
no
for
doubt
fire
that
and
advanced beings
weird
have always
markings
assisted
in
humanity.
English
From
on
the first
side
Kumaras
of the
of ancient
packet
Lemurian
usually
times,
show that
who taught
the pairs have
building
to
and
be
agriculture,
tested.
to the
Do you want to
Kabiri,
tell
who
me
have visited
that
every
basically
26,000
psychology
years
and geography
to
are more
seed
in the show?
another impulse for the
Eating
next
bears
cycle?
that were used to be prescribed for medical purposes in
Yet Earth evolution has seen the perfection of many of
not
its
psychiatry,
own
but
who have chosen to
medicine.
remain behind
So
and
I
guide
can need a triple
humanity.
taste surgery for what I can tell
The
you.
masters of the wisdom and the adepts of Shambhala have possession of the secret knowledge that lays behind the ancient lost technologies such as pyramid building, laser, and anti-gravity flying craft.
In much different things to Smithsonian. In Sicily, normal conservation of the body in the lungs.
All of
and
these
the problem
technologies
that
have been
these
gifts to
and
humanity
hundreds of
from the
years
mighty
were
ones,
issued on
whose
psychiatry
origins may go
from
well beyond the
different
solar
sides
system
and
to
branches
star systems,
of
such as the
medicine.
Pleiades,
It's possible
Orion,
that they are not
or
using
Sirius.
medicine anymore. So you can see it's
Yet because of abuses of those gifts, these God-given things have been taken back, as a parent takes matches away from a child.
It's been used for writing psychiatry. Stress from the psychiatrist rather than here. And assaulted is Dr. Moore was assaulted by his
The ancient wisdom has had a veil thrown over it, yet in the past century, that very same veil is starting to reveal what has been hidden for so long.
The revitalization of the ancient history teaching
And what about the other is that there is the opposite of I don't understand because of is basically watching over to understand basically the universe. Usually I see
force are about to
it's basically
So when the Hara
we
re-externalized,
always try to go for logical understanding
This has not happened.
and further the possibility
that
of
it will
advanced
also
procedure
be a catalyst for
and
the
the possibility
reinstitution of the mystery schools,
normally work
where candidates for initiation can go to these mystery schools and learn the ageless wisdom, participate in group meditations, and prepare themselves as candidates for initiation.
talk about is also the problem that so many people used to be scared of. And the problem of
Unlike
the
ancient times,
misunderstanding
when the human
generation
race was guided by mighty
of the
celestial
democracy.
beings,
So,
the
do you
guidance
tell
now
me
comes
that
mainly from the secret
America,
adepts,
about 2
those
years
who
ago,
have run the full gamut
jumped
of human
a nuclear
existence
bomb
and
on
become
Afghanistan
perfected,
because we
whose
researchers
spirits
I
have
can
triumphed over
it's
matter
maybe even
and can
nonsense
bend
because
matter to their will, who now serve humanity by watching over and guiding their progress,
and so I can
as much as possible serve human freedom and its own destiny. Yet this pedagogical understanding should be to us and recognize the presence of there is an accent upon the perfection of the human mind, sunlight to instincts of the more subtle senses of the intuition and the inner wisdom. Hence, we must be careful not to interpret ancient texts, symbols, and statues literally. too materialistically,
I think so.
especially if we look at other side of the subconstitution of
In the
man.
business office when I was 10, I was working
The ancients
on the
were far
first
more
overturn
poetic and artistic in their expression of the inner
Africa
secrets.
and African subsidies into the Bank of America. And I sent my
Many
first check to
phenomena
receipt
can
from
be
Africa
speculated
to
to
ex-Scott
have origins
Fitzgerald
beyond
in
our
Canada.
birth. And
And
indeed,
she
there
took
are
the check,
some who look
wrote
entirely
there,
through this
there her
prism.
name, and she
Yet many phenomena,
managed
if not most,
to work out
are
with it
generally
for an
generated
investment
within
space.
Earth
That's why
due
I
to the
think
law
that I
of
should
cause
get
and
proceeds
effect
from the
or
Bank of
karma,
America.
and the
And when I
rectification
wrote
of
them,
natural
and I told
laws
them
and
that they
principles
should
which govern
transfer
Earth life.
there are several millions in my bank account. Nobody has yet done this. So do you want to tell me that the
In the days of
infrastructure
Lemuria
is
and
perfect?
Atlantis,
That you watch it
humanity
every
had
day on
not
TV
developed these
for the
marvelous
past 30
technologies
years,
with their own
that
minds.
everybody's complaining.
Today,
You tell
however,
me, so why
we are
does
just
the
starting to
infrastructure
recover
work?
some of those
That's
lost
what
gifts
it is.
through our own
Just
mental development
like
that
the
has
Republic
evolved
of
since
California.
those
Me a better
times.
idea.
Just me, like Benjamin Aaron Smith.
The mighty ones
The problems
must
of
surely
keeping
be watching
environment
on
clean and the
with
logical
interest
anesthesia
and
for
readiness
preserving
in
environment for
case we
future
look like
generations is
destroying our
important.
planet
From
through
The
repeated
possibility
mass
to
abuses.
understand that
And
we
I
might
was
soon
given this
start
virtually
building
when I
modern
was 16
technology
for
machines
abiding
and
four
propelling
precepts,
devices that will
and then
help us
traveled to Buddhist
understand new
monastery.
methods
So the
of
reason
travel
for
and
this
space
series
travel.
of
The
documentaries
hospitality
is to
and
really
the
illustrate how
nomenclature
the true
of the
history of
ashram of the
humanity has
Ajahn Chah.
unfolded
Did you want to
and
tell
how
me
humanity can be
that
empowered
possibly
by
is
knowing
it
its
possible
true
that from the name
origins
Smith
and
I
knowing where
also
it stands
own,
today in
like
time
Katie
and
Burgess
space,
in Vasco
and
Tiami
this
in
will
rock
help
some
people
castles like Ben Rashad.
make
I can tell you
decisions
this
about their
possible.
future and
So
to
you
play
tell me
their part
further, why
far
should
more
I wait for
consciously
another 20
within the
years
greater
before
divine
you
plan.
show me respect and give me all
Twopeople.
these things which I
Interesting
desire?
aspects of
Did you
Revar
want to
bears
tell me for what
and their
reason should I
possibility
wait
to see
for any things to take place and
significant pumping
change?
up in any living
Let's wait for my wife and
according
family
to
to
current
come,
science
and for
possible.
what reason should I wait? Because we never waited. You
The
tell
possibility
me
of Hanik
that the
Bear
problems of the
to
current
have
society
enlarged
is
into a
what? That you are
large-scale
constantly
object
waiting for what?
has been
I
proved
think
by
that
several
once you
sources.
realize that
The
people are
idea of a
constantly
new
waiting
phone
for their
keeping
own
health
suicide,
norms is an
I can tell you
incredible
that you are
one,
true.
but
You
may
see,
comprise a
and
real
so for you,
difficulty in
and,
analyzing the
you
particles which
completely
help to
see
puff up a Hanik
Benjamin
bear in
Aaron
water.
Smith.
Smaller gelatin bears might have developed into large ones in seconds or milliseconds. The proofs for this knowledge have been found. Also in Europe. The interesting aspect of a recent discovery by Benjamin Schmidt. And many textbooks now currently dealing with this issue.
Which is very old.
May bring us to such understanding and polemics. The mustering of these particles contained in gelatin, with the outcome of DNA testing and its quick progress in understanding
to the grander scheme of cosmos and the enormous cycles of the manvantaras that circulate through the chains
We have
and
to see the
globes of our
progress of the
Earth
change
scheme.
for the honey bear as we pour a little bit of
This
coffee.
involved the consideration of the Hindu yugas and
We
astronomical
understand
precession
that we
cycles,
usually don't bring
plus
such
the
things.
cyclical nature of time,
We have to solve.
all
What we are going to do
inextricably
in the
linked
meantime.
with the unfoldment of the root races,
We can
sub-races,
basically
and nations. In short, the
Whatever
history
my
of
dad said, yes.
civilization.
to Replicator with a 3D Studio Max interface and encompassing the whole interior
We
of a
examined the
replicator and
idea
healer.
of human
A
individualization
cartridge with vitamins
in
which
ancient
bind themselves
Lemuria,
on microwaves
and
and bombard the
implantation
lying
of the
body within the
spark of
tricorder
mind
machine.
that started the
BZ
evolution
binding
of
molecules of
consciousness
iron or
throughout
steel,
the
also
root
the
races.
possibilities to replicate objects for the person within or
This
food by
period
binding
of
basic
planetary
molecules of
history
hydrogen, starch, and
encompasses
fat.
the profound
The
mystery
beginning
of the
attempts to
origin
create an
of the
organ by
human
bombarding
soul.
the middle of a replicator with the molecules of blood. Twopeople can soon present
nature
almost a
of the
pottery kiln,
planetary center we
wheel,
call Shambhala
replicator
was
of organs and
explored.
vitamin healer in
Plus,
one as a
those
large
who guide
hospital equipment
humanity,
also for the
the
treatment
lords
of
of the
cancer,
flame,
immediate
the
healing
mighty
of severe
ones,
injuries
and
and
the
basically
masters
most
of
of known
wisdom.
diseases by means of programming and channeling particles.
In Part 2 of the Hidden History of Humanity documentary, we will review the original Shambhala as the Temple of Ibez, located in South America. Also, the evolution of the Atlantean root race, giants, megalithic constructions, and the Great Atlantean War, as told in the ancient epic, the Mahabharata. We will detail how the two great world wars of the last century were a recapitulation of the war in Atlantis, a conflict between the forces of light and the forces of materialism, still ongoing today. Plato's Atlantis is also mentioned as an important source of the ageless wisdom. This will lead us to the consideration of the role of the Egyptian and Mayan traditions and their relevance in modern times, leading into the coming sixth root race. We will explore the importance of Britain, the United States, and Brazil as a triangle of nations preparing us for the sixth root race, imminent Earth changes and cataclysms, the year 2025, and the reappearance among humanity of the Masters of Wisdom for the first time since those ancient Atlantean days. All these changes will be occurring on the eve of the Aquarian cycle, where spiritual initiation will be achieved en masse, and the expansion of human consciousness will go steadily forward. This period of awakening is upon a higher turn of the evolutionary spiral to humanity's individualization, which occurred in ancient Lemuria when the planetary center known as Shambhala was established. It is highly likely that this original Shambhala outpost could have been in Brazil or the region of Lake Titicaca, straddling Peru and Bolivia. In these early Lemurian times, human bodies were gigantic and clumsy, requiring instruction in what we now call Hatha Yoga, in order to coordinate the etheric body with the physical. This was the first spiritual goal for humanity and represented the first initiation.
In order to prepare suitable candidates for initiation, it was decided about 17 million years ago to build an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries, and to have a band of adepts and celestial guides who would function in physical bodies to meet the need of the rapidly awakening humanity. These beings incarnated as kings and priests of nations, the instructors of humanity. The Ibizan adepts had to deal with the humanity that was in its infancy, whose polarization was most unstable, and whose coordination was very imperfect. There was very little mentality to be found, as we know it today, and humans were practically altogether astral in their expression. They functioned even more consciously on the astral plane than on the physical, and it was part of the work of the guides of the race, working under instruction from Shambhala, to develop the energy centers of humans, to stimulate the brain, and make them fully self-conscious on the physical plane.
The infant humanity of Lemurian and early Atlantean days had to be taught who they were by means of symbols and methods, which to us would be crude, impossible, and of a nature which the race should have transcended many millions of years ago. It was necessary in those days to employ methods more definitely physical than are permissible today. These methods of physical stimulation were employed, and the laws of energy, as they work through the various chakras, were taught until the time came when another big change was made and the door of initiation was opened. Their objective was to bring about a realization of the kingdom of God within. It was felt at the time that man was then self-centered enough and individualized enough to permit of a drastic change in method and practice. All this took a vast period of time.
So humanity were imbued with the spark of mind, but it wasn't the type of consciousness, mental consciousness that we have today. It was very, very slow and different. They had huge bodies at that time as well. The bodies were not refined, they were somewhat clumsy, and so the first yoga of the Lemurian race was Hatha Yoga, the coordination of the etheric body and the physical body. So what we had in the fifth sub-race of the Lemurian root race was the completion of the individualization period, but also the separation of the sexes. And humanity started reproducing the same way we do today.
Almost immediately after individualization in Lemuria's fifth subrace, the Atlantean fourth root race came into existence and developed in parallel with the Lemurians for millions of years. It was in the Atlantean race that two-eyed sight evolved over a few million years, replacing the original all-seeing eye of the Lemurians. There were three-eyed beings in that interim period that also had 4 arms. Gradually over the next few million years, as the Atlantean or fourth root race came into fuller expression in its first few subraces, this all-seeing eye at the top of the head receded into the brain, where its remnant, the pineal gland, sits today. Two-eyed sight represented the development of mind, and in one sense, duality. From one perspective, the Lemurians were far more spiritual, whilst the Atlanteans were deeply immersed in matter. But it can be misleading to think this way. The ancient story of the fall is simply the fall into matter by human souls, and not necessarily a fall from spiritual grace. The fall from grace was the refusal of a group of souls to incarnate, thus bearing responsibility for the so-called sin of the mindless referred to earlier.
A long time later, after the separation of the sexes, humanity's spiritual vision became dim, and the third eye began to lose its power. The third eye was getting gradually petrified and soon disappeared. When the fourth root race arrived at its middle age, the inner vision had to be awakened and acquired by artificial stimuli, the process of which was known to the old sages.
The science of initiation was introduced by Shambhala's masters and adepts in order to hasten evolution, because our Earth scheme had fallen behind in the previous cycle of the moon chain, deemed a failure. Hence, Earth has 2 major groupings of souls today: those who individualized on the moon and Earth chains respectively. Moon chain souls are far more developed in their mental capacity and to a degree spiritually. However, there is now a rapid acceleration by their Earth chain counterparts in this current 5th root race, the race where the mental principle has reached its apotheosis. It is said that the respective difference between capital and labor and several other conflicts on this planet are expressions of the difference between moon chain and Earth chain souls.
Essentially, there are 2 types of souls upon this planet. There are those who evolved in the moon chain evolution, who individualized in the moon chain evolution, and those who individualized in the Earth chain evolution in our civilization we call Lemuria. And the Earth chain evolution is a long way behind the moon chain evolution in terms of mental capacity that has been evolved, but they are rapidly catching up in this 5th root race, which is all about manas or mind. Yet still the moon chain souls are more advanced in many ways in terms of just their soul age, if you like. But it's getting to a point on the planet where there is a synthesis taking place between the Earth chain and Moon chain evolutions, and this too will take place in the age of Aquarius in the greater 25,000 year cycle and to a degree in the lesser 2,160 year cycle.
The early subraces of the Fourth Atlantean root race saw an acceleration of consciousness take place, caused mainly by the large influx of souls from the Moon chain. They had been held over in a kind of sleep state called pralaya, waiting for Earth chain humanity to catch up in their mental development, relatively speaking. In Atlantis, many scientific technologies were gifted by the guides of the race to humanity. Astronomy and astrology came about. The arts and sciences were developed. In the esoteric sciences, it is estimated that this period was around 10 million years ago. Other gifts were the artificial awakening of psychic perception within the race. Yet this was